The Denver Broncos finalized their 2025 NFL rookie draft class, and we'll tell you why Jahdae Barron, RJ Harvey are two players that will have an immediate impact on day one for the Denver Broncos on today's episode of the show.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day for all your Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more. This is the place to be. So special shout out to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And it's easy to become an everydayer. All you have to do is hit that subscribe or that follow button wherever you get your podcast, and you're never going to miss out on anything as it pertains to your favorite coverage of all things orange and blue. As always, I'm your host, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports.
And I'm Sayre Bedinger, the site expert at predominantlyorange.com.
Together, you get the best Broncos podcast out there for all your objective coverage points of view. There's no better place than Locked On Broncos. And Broncos Country, here's what we got on today's episode of the show. We're reacting to the Broncos 2025 rookie draft class, and we're going to go through and tell you why we believe players like Jahdae Barron, RJ Harvey are going to be impact players for the Broncos on offense and defense on day one. We'll also go into several players we believe could be surprise additions that could get playing time this upcoming season, including a new punter in Jeremy Crawshaw. And we'll also tell you why guys like Caleb Lohner could be big-time projects here for the Broncos that could have some high upside potential. We'll break it all down much more in today's episode of the show. Sayre, my friend, look, obviously, the 2025 NFL draft is in the books, and I would say for the most part, when you look at Broncos Country, heck, you can look at all the comments on all of our shows since the Broncos have added players. This fan base, they feel a certain way. A lot of fans feel great about it. A lot of fans don't like the draft class. There's not a lot of the flashy, sexy names that they were looking for that we were even adding in our mock drafts here. But overall, this is a draft class by the Broncos on paper that's just like, you just have to wait and see. I think ultimately that's going to be our biggest point that we're going to drive home. But they did add some game changers in here. And look, I think we've got to start off with their first two picks in the draft. That's Jahdae Barron out of Texas and RJ Harvey, who we touched on when they were drafted. But now we have a little bit of some big picture focus when it comes to these two prospects.
Yeah, as always with any NFL draft class, you are going to have to reserve judgment until these guys get on the field. But the great news is I think the top two picks for sure in this class, and a couple of others that we'll talk about later, but the top two picks for sure are going to be getting on the field a lot as rookies. I mean, the Broncos made a substantial investment, and I would argue, Cody, that I don't know this for a fact, but because we know that the Broncos didn't expect Jahdae Barron to be there in the first round, I would argue that they legitimately changed their entire draft plan around selecting him in the first round. Because if that wasn't a scenario that you had envisioned happening, then they adjusted their draft plan based on this guy. So I think that's fascinating when you think about it that way. And certainly he's a player who, you and I did an episode on the show. I know in our final mock draft, we didn't have Jahdae Barron going to the Broncos, but we did do an entire episode dedicated to the idea of potentially drafting him and the connections that are made between, him and Vance Joseph's cousin working at Texas. So you and I did call that, we didn't call the pick, but we did call that out early in the process. And so I know all the everydayers out there heard about Jahdae Barron in the process. So there is reason to bring him in. There's reason to bring him in. That's obvious. And it's the middle of the field defense really struggled last year for the Denver Broncos. And that was at all three levels, right? It wasn't just Jaquan McMillan in the slot. It was your linebackers struggling to pass off coverage. It was struggling between the safeties and the linebackers with communication and, breakdowns on the back end. But it starts with that nickel, that slot corner, where Jahdae Barron now gives you not only a guy who is as instinctive as anybody, but he's got ball skills. He's got elite athletic traits, elite top end speed, a 4.39 in the 40-yard dash. So you add a true top 10 player. This is the bottom line. The Broncos, when they were picking at 20, were not expecting to get somebody that they actually had a first round grade on, because we know there's probably 10, 12, maybe 15 in a really good class guys that actually have first round grades. For the Broncos to get one, that's a big deal.
Well, and for them, they also view it as, if we make our defense better, we know that's going to help Bo Nix. A big reason you look at the Broncos in games that they played against Baltimore and games they played against Buffalo. A lot of the issue, especially towards the end of the season, is that the Broncos defense was on the field way too long, and there were too many plays given up in the passing game or, attacking the inside linebackers there. So what do the Broncos do this offseason? They go out and they get Talanoa Hufanga to pair alongside Brandon Jones. They go and get Dre Greenlaw to add that versatility at the inside linebacker position. And now you add another cover guy, which the Broncos believe to be very important. I mean, Sayre, we saw what it was like without Riley Moss, how the Broncos managed to play. Like when Riley Moss was on the field, the Broncos played man coverage, according to NFL Next Gen stats, 40.1% of the time with Riley. When he was not on the field, they played man coverage. It dropped to 31%. How often they played it there. So a massive drop off in how it impacted scheme. Now you have Jaquan McMillan, who's still going to be on this roster, but now you have what the Broncos believe 4 really good defensive backs. And we're not even including Chris Abrams-Drain at this point, but look at the teams that the Broncos are going to play this season. Heavy laden wide receiver teams. First off, you get that rematch against the Cincinnati Bengals. You're going to need to find a way to be able to cover all those guys. You got the Washington Commanders, who've obviously added some weapons there for Jaden Daniels. The Philadelphia Eagles, they have some really good wide receivers, plus a very strong run game there with Saquon Barkley. The Dallas Cowboys, they've got receivers. They got CeeDee Lamb. The Chargers, they have Mike Williams, Ladd McConkey. I mean, they couldn't stop Ladd McConkey when he was really the only guy last year. So they've added to that. Trey Harris as well. Kansas City, they're going to have wide receivers. And they got speed. And that's the thing, is you need to be able to have cover guys. And Sean Payton said it, like, a cornerback is a premium position. He said, back in the day, you could have one really good cornerback, and if you didn't have another good one on the other side, it could have been problematic. Now, if you don't have at least 2 good corners, it can be problematic in today's game. Jahdae Barron gives the Broncos some juice there right away. And look, I did a film review over at Mile High Sports. I love everything that this player brings to the table, and I'm a defensive back guy, so I might be a little biased when it comes to that, just watching DBs play. I think it's going to be a seamless fit into this scheme here for Vance Joseph, and they're just going to have to keep building on that. But now let's talk about RJ Harvey here in terms of being another game changer, a guy who can have an impact day one. You and I said it in the podcast after they drafted him. I really see a vision where, okay, yes, they got Audric Estime, and I think people look at the Broncos running back room and say, well, these guys are all unproven. That is true. But the Broncos, if Audric Estime does become the guy that they think he can be, the guy that we saw against the Kansas City Chiefs is just hard to bring down. He can wear down a defense. And then you bring in a guy like RJ Harvey, who not only has 4.4 explosive speed, he can bounce it to the outside and get up the sideline really quickly. But on top of that, he's also bruisingly physical despite being 5'8". He's 205 pounds. This is the Broncos have a chance to have a really good running back duo if it plays out into the way the Broncos have this vision for him. Plus, you mentioned the factor he can contribute and grow more, I think, as a receiver out of the backfield. But he's also going to be, I think, an element there. He could be very much in line to be next to Marvin Mims as the other kick returner this upcoming season, which, you impact 3 phases of that. The Broncos really believe they got great value in these 2 picks. And I think when you look at it on paper, I think, yes, they did. Now it's got to translate onto the field. That's what we have to see here.
Yeah, we do. And I can't wait to see that, because the Broncos haven't had a running back with this kind of explosiveness in a really long time. I mean, on a consistent basis, too. We're talking about since 2023, no running back in all of college football had as many 15-plus yard runs as did RJ Harvey. So we're talking about one of the best big play running backs in the entire draft. And if folks are worried about his size, our good friend Larry, who's an everyday listener of the show, pointed out to me during the draft, Cody, he's just a skosh smaller than Ashton Jeanty. I mean, it's borderline not even noticeable when you look at their measurables on paper. So we're all worried about Jeanty going to the Raiders, or we would have loved a scenario where he could have been a Bronco. Weren't worried about Jeanty's size in that instance, but RJ Harvey is really about the same exact size. So fascinating to me from that vantage point. And you talk about the explosiveness, the speed, showing no ill effects of what I think is one of the biggest criticisms of the selection, is that he had a major knee injury back in 2022. We don't see any ill effects from that, Cody. Obviously on the field, when you're that explosive, running a 4.4, the vertical jump is there, the RAS is there. I mean, it's all there for this guy. So, I mean, the injury, you note it, obviously, you have it in the back of your mind, but when you what you're really calculating when you have an injury as a factor is, did that affect the way the guy played? And we don't see that.
No, I mean, honestly, he had better numbers post ACL than he had numbers before the ACL injury. 2022, he suffered the ACL injury. 2023, he comes back and runs for, I think, 1,400 yards, 16 touchdowns on the ground. 2024, he follows it up with a 1,500-yard performance, 22 touchdowns on the ground. And look, I was having fun watching him on tape because there's times, and their offense, UCF's offense, I mean, it was nothing special really outside of RJ Harvey. I mean, their quarterback was just up and down at times, but their scheme wasn't necessarily complex. They would motion him out of the pistol right next to the back into a gun look, and they'd get a handoff. He'd do an inside zone. He'd see something there. If the hole closed, he bounced it outside, and he got big-time yards, explosive plays. He's patient on the inside as well. I mean, he played significantly better after the ACL than his numbers were before he even suffered the knee injury. So not obviously a worry there. The Broncos like his medicals. I'm excited, but right now he and Audric Estime seem like the two guys on this roster at running back that are guaranteed to be there. I think now everybody else, Jaleel McLaughlin, you look at Tyler Bidet, you look at Blake Watson, these guys are going to be competing, I think, for that final spot on the 53, and I'm very curious to see how that's going to play out here. Broncos Country, want to know your thoughts on the impact that you believe Jahdae Barron, RJ Harvey could have here day one for the Broncos. A lot of storylines as we get ready for training camp, which will come up here in July, but we're not done yet. Broncos Country still got a lot to break down on today's episode of the show. Up next, we're going to talk about players like Pat Bryant, Sai'vion Jones, and Q Robinson, players we believe could have a surprise impact this upcoming season for the Broncos, despite them having key depth at those positions already.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Gametime. There is nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment just feels huge. It's electric in the arena. And with Gametime, you can be part of that action without the stress of any last-minute ticket hunting. Gametime, it makes it fast and easy to get your NBA playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. And prices on the app, they actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%.
I mean, Sarah, you nailed it there. You mentioned it. Last-minute tickets. I mean, that's the thing. Like last-minute deals, the best prices that you can get on seats right before kickoff or tip-off or first pitch, whatever. Saving that much up to 60% off of buying last minute makes it easy to be spontaneous with your friends, your family, be able to say, hey, let's go to a game. That's one thing I like about the Gametime app. They make it easy to make a quick and easy decision on that. Plus, they have all-in pricing, which means that when you go to checkout, there are no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
The Denver Broncos didn't necessarily get a lot of instant starters out of the second and third days of this draft class, but these guys are going to have an impact. And Cody and I are going to tell you exactly what impact you can expect out of players like Pat Bryant, Sai'vion Jones, and maybe a punter from down under now coming to the Mile High City to start booming the ball and helping with field position. But Broncos Country, before we get into those picks, I want to say thank you and give a shout out to all of you that hung out with Cody and I during the NFL draft and that became everyday listeners, especially for those of you that are just discovering the show and becoming everyday listeners. We appreciate every single one of you. Hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. You can become an everydayer today because your boys Cody and Sayre, we got you covered all off season long with everything Denver Broncos. Cody, let's talk about some of the instant impact that we can expect, or maybe in terms of what fans are expecting right now, some surprise impact as well, because day 2 of the NFL draft, the Broncos got their running back. They got RJ Harvey in the fold, and then everyone was kind of expecting a run on playmakers. So with their very next pick, which they effectively traded up to get Pat Bryant, a controversial, to say the least, wide receiver selection out of Illinois. I'm curious for your take on this now, having kind of been able to watch more of Pat and see a little bit more of what he brings to the table, because look, this was a surprise selection. There were not any mock drafts that I saw that had Pat Bryant going to the Broncos in round 3, but they prioritized this guy. It wasn't like they were like, oh shoot, we need to take a wide receiver. They picked him over other guys and effectively moved up to get him.
Yeah, well, and I think this is a big reason why when we talk about the practice of mock drafts and how certain outlets may have guys ranked or projected at different spots, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Sean Payton has said it doesn't matter where other teams have these guys. Like, for example, a lot of people had Troy Franklin with a fourth or fifth round grade. The Broncos, they had a round 2 grade on him. Audric Estime, what did they have? A round 2 or round 3 grade on him initially, and he went in round number 5. Ultimately, what matters is that the team sees something in him. And right now, as we know, the commitment the Broncos already have to that wide receiver room that's already in place. They added a guy that they feel like is going to bring value. This is going to grow into, I think, a pivotal role here. Look, 6'3", 190 pounds. And the thing about Pat Bryant that I really like, and all people have to do, like you're seeing people say, oh, he ran a 4.6 40-yard dash. He's not very fast. But when you watch him actually make plays with the football in his hands, he's got explosive play capability, right? It's not necessarily about like you can have a guy who runs a 4.3 40, but never does anything at the NFL level. But this is a guy who's pretty solid with his routes. He's not necessarily going to be a guy who's going to beat man coverage, but when you scheme certain things up and you scheme him open in certain situations, that he's going to catch the football. Reliable hands. He's a willing blocker. Like that's the thing. And on top of that, Sayre, he was a former captain. So he's going to come into this wide receiver room, learn from Courtland Sutton, who is a veteran leader, a veteran captain as is. And this is a guy I think is going to carve out a role for himself immediately on special teams. He's got more of a chance, I think, to rotate into the wide receiver position, I think, than many people think. I definitely think he'll rotate in over a guy like Trent Sherfield at this point, who's probably just going to be a special teams guy. But Pat Bryant, don't just – I hate when people just look at like a box score, but they don't actually watch the player. Watch the player. You can see easily why the Broncos like him, because this is a guy who does the dirty work. And I think that's something that Sean Payton values. And look, it kind of fits the mold for what he's looking for, guys who have size. And, I think somebody said he's little Jordan Humphrey who can catch in a sense. Yeah. And I was like, well, I don't necessarily know if that's necessarily don't make that that doesn't come across as a compliment, because I think fans are really split on, what little Jordan Humphrey did. A lot of people are mad at little Jordan Humphrey taking snaps away from other guys. But what I think that analogy is that somebody said, I think you're going to get a guy who's going to be more consistent across the board with a guy like Pat Bryant. And look, they may not need him to play a big role now, but this is a guy who could be a surprise player. Sayre, do we remember Devon Vele? Everyone's like, why did the Broncos get this guy? He's 27 years old. Oh, he's not going to add much to the table. And then all of a sudden, everyone's like, oh my gosh, Devon Vele, training camp. Wow, this guy's going to make the 53-man roster. Like, just let things play out. I think that Bryant could have a special teams impact right away, but I think he's very much in line to maybe compete to rotate in. I don't think Devon Vele's spot is necessarily safe. I think that there is competition there with him, obviously A.T. Perry and Pat Bryant right now for maybe some playing time. And I'm excited to see how it's going to play out, but I want to get your thoughts on Sai'vion Jones, man, because we talked about defensive end. You can go Sai'vion Jones. We'll also talk about Q Robinson, and this may carry over into the next segment, but I look at these additions that the Broncos made on the defensive end, and one thing stands out with Sai'vion Jones. One thing stands out with Q Robinson. High motor, high energy, athletic skill set to him as well. This is something that the Broncos, specifically for the edge rusher and defensive end positions, it seems like that room values that a lot.
Yeah, they do, that effort, and it's exemplified from the top down at the depth chart, right? Zach Allen, I mean, you can't pull the guy off the field. He refuses to come off. He's just high effort every down, every snap player. John Franklin Myers is very much the same type of guy, and DJ Jones as well. These guys are just relentless workers. Going to be fascinating to see where Sai'vion Jones fits into the rotation, because off the top of my head, it's pretty easy to kind of write off Jordan Jackson and say, well, he's going to take Jordan Jackson's snaps. But I think the Broncos have a lot of good players on that defensive front. They can rotate guys. They can bring guys in waves. There's a element of Sai'vion Jones' game that I feel is just perfect for instant impact. It's his explosiveness off the snap, his length. And then I mentioned this on yesterday's show too, Cody, or a couple shows ago. I can't remember which one. The draft blurs things together, but it's this bat out of hell mentality when the ball is snapped, because you just cause like a a frenzy when you're out there and you've got these 34-inch arms over an 80-inch wingspan, and you're using your length combined with effort, hustle, and then you've got these different rip moves. You're spinning and trying to just doing whatever it takes to get to the quarterback. It's not like a stunt that offensive linemen can just pick up. It's like a guy who's like, we need to it's like the kid at the daycare that's like, everybody else is doing their thing, everybody else is falling in line, and then this other kid at the daycare is just like ripping things off the wall and trying to climb out the window. That's what I mean when it's like bat out of hell. It's like you're causing chaos no matter what, just every time the ball is snapped. And so I love that element of his game, and I love the fact that Jamar Cain, the Broncos, formerly pass rush coach, now he's I believe just the whole D line, or so he coached him at LSU, right? He coached him at LSU. And so there's a connection there. And the 3 degrees of separation, by the way, came into play with every single selection I think the Broncos made in this draft, which is fascinating. So it might be time to start reading the tea leaves before the draft, as opposed to maybe those top 30 visits, which Broncos rarely take guys from that. But Sai'vion Jones, a great pick, should definitely play at least 150 to 200 snaps this year. And I think he'll maximize those.
100%. I think as well. Look, I think the Broncos, if they're going to invest in paying Zach Allen, there may be a thing like, hey, we love the motor that you have, but we want to be able to protect you. We want to protect our investment. So there's going to be times where you have to come off the field instead of playing, 99% of the defensive snaps. And the only time he ever comes off really is when he gets banged up on a play. Man, he gets banged up, he comes right back out there. That's the thing you like about Zach. But, you got a really good rotational guy in Jordan Jackson. But I also think Sai'vion Jones could be where the Broncos view like, hey, we've got John Franklin Myers. If we can't extend him, can this guy showcase something this year where maybe he grows into a starter role potentially? I mean, that's certainly an option on the table. It's just a vision right now. Next year, 2 years from now, what are you thinking about there? And that's what goes into the thought process when the Broncos are looking at bringing in prospects. With Sai'vion Jones, obviously the 4.5 sacks at LSU, that stands out there. But, man, you look at his pressures, right? Pressures are a very, very important number, right? We talk about that so much. It's one of the statistics that should be counted more. 43 pressures last season at LSU. That's more in one season than his previous 3 years combined. So this is a player they believe high motor, developmental trajectories heading in a nice direction. The Broncos like this pick. But we're not done yet. Broncos country still. We're going to break down the surprise impact that guys like Q Robinson and Jeremy Crawshaw could have for the Broncos right away. And on top of that, we'll tell you why Caleb Lohner is a developmental project that could turn out into something special for Sean Payton. You'll get that much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by Nissan and the Armada pick of the week, brought to you by our friends over there at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. And this week, we are highlighting the top pick from our draft, the one selection that truly, truly stood out. The guy who showcased the strength and power to push the Denver Broncos forward as we look ahead to next season.
I mean, Sayre, this week's Armada and clear-cut top pick of the draft is Jahdae Barron, cornerback out of Texas. What he's going to bring to the table here for the Denver Broncos, he's got a rugged play style, heavy duty in terms of where the Broncos are at with their now cornerback depth. But this is a guy who can conquer the road with capability and confidence. Dream big, go big. This is a guy I think is going to have an immediate impact for the Broncos on day one inside the secondary. And when it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer. And that's exactly what I think Jahdae Barron can do here. And it's clear that our top pick of the draft is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of their outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, the Rogue, or Pathfinder, and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. The fourth quarter action of today's episode of Locked On Broncos is here now as the NFL draft has concluded. Broncos country, we want to know your thoughts on Denver's rookie class here in 2025, but we're going to go through and continue to talk about players we believe can have a surprise impact, and obviously why one player in this year's draft class has developmental traits that could be exciting or could amount to nothing. Well, that's still to be determined. We'll break it down here. I want to say thanks to all the everydayers out there in Broncos country for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. Sayre, let's continue on here. Let's move on to Q Robinson. Obviously, outside linebacker, edge rusher, was really a key special teams ace for the Alabama Crimson Tide. I know a player that Nick Saban loved a ton. When you look at it defensively, you can certainly see that, hey, this guy's quick off the edge. He's got really good bend to him. He's also got a wide variety of different pass rush tools. But while this isn't a position of need for the Broncos, Denver adding depth here in the event, I think, of any injury at outside linebacker. But I think more importantly, I feel like with some of the rule changes coming up on special teams, I think this was a key special teams move as well.
100%. This guy is going to be absolutely out there as a core four special teamer, making an impact very early on. And I found it interesting that the Broncos and George Payton talked about how I think he played like roughly 350 or so snaps at Alabama last year. And they really talked about how you started to see him come on as an edge guy on tape last season. And yes, it's a small sample size for this guy, but the talent has always been there, right? A 4-star or 5-star prospect, depending on what recruiting site you utilize. And you just kind of get buried on the depth chart. And again, George Payton alluded to him getting buried behind Will Anderson and Dallas Turner and those other players, which is a similar issue that I think Drew Sanders faced. So maybe these two guys can relate a little bit on that. But I think when you look at what the best teams in the league, they all have depth off the edge. They all are bringing waves of pass rushers. Look at the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, they have so many different guys that you can bring off the edge, and they're always replenishing that talent. They're not just sitting on, well, hey, we got our top 2 or 3 guys set, so we're good. Just have a couple of undrafted guys out there who play special teams. No, you want to stack that room with talent. And so while I understand that Broncos fans wanted another weapon offensively there, and I don't disagree, I would have been totally happy with that. I would have been very excited. I love the idea of strengthening a strength and getting yourself another pass rusher. Nick Bonito's in a contract year. Dondre Tillman signed an exclusive rights free agent tender. No guarantee that he's going to duplicate or improve upon last year's performance. Jonah Ellis got a shoulder issue. So you already can see the thought process here of like, hey, worst case scenario, we've got a guy that's elite on special teams. Best case scenario, he develops into a potential starter down the line.
And that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. And like I said, I put a tweet out there that coming into the draft, Sayre, the Broncos on offense and defense, they had their starter set maybe at every position except running back really being the only one in question. Everybody and inside linebacker, but we know who's already in that competition. We know it's going to be between a few players. They weren't going to draft a player that's going to come in and be the starter next to Dre Greenlaw, but ideally every starting position was set on this roster. So really it is about adding depth. It's about adding impact players. And I think Broncos country, like the ones who are so angry, wanted them to add a starter in rounds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. That's unrealistic. Though some of these guys, doesn't matter where they get drafted, it's what they do with the opportunity. Some of these guys can be starters here. I think the guy who's probably got the best chance of being a starter is the punter, Jeremy Crawshaw, the Australian out of Florida, obviously. And look, worked with Darren Rizzi in the pre-draft process, had lunch with him a handful of times. This is a player who, I think over a course of 53 games at Florida, his average yard per punt, whatever it may be, was 45.6 or 46.5. That's pretty good at the college level, but he's an Aussie. And that's the thing is you can boom it. Our good friend Andrew Mason said, one of the bowl games that he went to in terms of practices, when you heard him kick the ball, it sounded like an echoing boom every time he did it. Like that's the type of power he's got. In my opinion, I don't think the competition will be close between Matt Hack and Crawshaw. I think Crawshaw will probably get this one relatively quickly.
Yeah, I wonder because we know the Broncos right now have 2 punters and 2 long snappers on the roster. I know Mitchell Fraboni, the long snapper, is dealing with an injury that he's recovering from. He's expected to be ready at some point later this offseason.
OTAs.
It's not ideal, right, to have those 2 positions having multiple guys on your offseason roster. But I do think that there will be a pretty quick competition there. You draft a punter. I mean, you're going to keep that guy around and at least see what you've got for a year. You're not going to just waste that investment unless he's otherworldly bad, which I think that would be a surprise based on what we've seen and heard about his abilities. So handpicked by Darren Rizzi, right? I mean, that's the thing about these top 2 picks of day 3 of the draft is you can see Darren Rizzi's fingerprints all over it, which makes it even more fascinating.
Yeah, and look, you got to be able to compete on special teams. Like I don't know if people realize this, like Sean Payton has driven it home since he came in, how important that third element of the game is. And the Broncos really last year, I mean, that's why he made some changes. They lost some games due to special teams, and that's not acceptable in his eyes. So I think they've made some moves here. They feel like hey, this is going to elevate the competition in terms of guys trying to, compete for a 53-man roster spot, but in return should make our special teams even better, which it was really good last year, but a couple of lapses cost the Broncos in some games last season. So, a lot to look at there. Let's talk about the project here that, Sean Payton, there were some conversations about, you look at former basketball players transition into football. Julius Thomas played at Portland State, became a really big stud for the Broncos. You look at Jimmy Graham, former basketball player. Tony Gonzalez, former basketball player, transitioned to a football player. The thing with Caleb Lohner, right? And this is just, look, this is a round 7 pick. This is not like, wow, this is going to be game-changing. But 4 total catches, right? Appeared in 12 games for Utah. 4 catches, I think 53 yards total, but 4 touchdowns and 6'8" size. He's got athleticism there. He's still developing as a football player. So there's no guarantee this pick will ever work out, but the Broncos are viewing it as, this is a project. What can we do? What can Sean Payton do with a guy who's worked with guys like Jimmy Graham and obviously Jason Witt and things along, other names like that, Jeremy Shockey. This would be an interesting project here for the Broncos.
Which I like. I think in the 7th round, that's kind of what you want to be doing, unless you're for sure getting somebody that like a Jonathan Cooper who fell due to, I think, some health concerns going into the draft.
Yeah.
You want to get guys that are worthwhile risks to take. And it feels like the Broncos have either been on the winning side or the losing side of almost all the basketball guys who have really worked out in the NFL, right? I mean, Sean Payton now connecting them there to Jimmy Graham, and then you had to go against Gonzalez and Gates for all those years before getting Julius Thomas. So I think it's an interesting dart throw. I love the fact that the dude just comes off the basketball floor, 56 snaps, I think, total for the Broncos to evaluate. And they're just like, hey, we're going to throw you the ball. If you can go grab it, that would be awesome. And he's like, oh, yeah, no problem. 4 for 4. That's a pretty ridiculous ratio right there. I mean, if it was even just one throw, 1 catch, 1 touchdown, but he did it 4 times. And so I think that's fascinating for this guy to be able to come into camp and show the Broncos what he can do.
Yeah, 2 years in a row, you get a project at the tight end position. Thomas Yasmin, another Utah guy, right? They like Thomas Yasmin because he's got potential to do some things as well. So I think where Denver's at, could this be a weapon? Maybe. Is there a guarantee? No, right? You don't have a lot to go off of. You don't have a sample size that's going to say, hey, is this going to work? But you take a gamble on guys like this, right? You find gambles in undrafted rookie free agency all the time. Take a gamble here on a guy who's 7th round, who's got athletic skill set. And the thing that Sean Payton said was, we saw him move at his pro day. He's got really good movement skills. You can see things are like, oh, okay, let's try it. It's like not the money ball approach, but you're taking a chance on a guy that's got some physical intangibles that if it can connect mentally and you can start getting it to showcase at the NFL level. Okay, great. I mean, this is a guy who I think has an opportunity to be stashed away on the practice squad, or Sayre, he comes out in training camp in the preseason, ends up being one of the bigger surprises there. That would be a ideal, amazing thing to happen. But let's just wait and see, right? There's nothing that's going to say it is going to work, it isn't going to work. But we could come in and we could be very surprised by another Broncos round 7 edition out of Utah, kind of like the guy like Devon Vele was last season. So you never know, Broncos country. But with that said, let us know your thoughts on the Broncos 2025 rookie draft class. Now that some of you have had a chance to actually do your research, sit down and go actually watch these prospects. Has your perception of them changed at all from some of the initial crazy reactions I think that we saw, from the widespread people of not being happy, Broncos fans not being happy with where Denver went? I'm very curious to see what Broncos country has to say. But as always, we appreciate you, Broncos country. Thanks for being an everydayer. To be honest here, we want to say thank you so much to everybody on YouTube. 17,000 everydayers that just now, that's where we surpassed there, Sayre. So obviously a lot of amazing interaction from everyone in Broncos country. We appreciate you so much for tuning in, locking in. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to take a look at the Broncos undrafted rookie free agent class. Who got the bigger signing bonuses? Which players stand out as potential? Who could be the next undrafted gem that the Broncos establish and maybe find their way onto the 53-man roster? We'll break that down much more on tomorrow's episode. Locked On Broncos.